Transportation is the biggest bottleneck in Foxhole. No matter how well your team builds or fights, if supplies don't move, the war grinds to a halt. In every war, behind the front lines of tanks, infantry, and artillery, there's a hidden network that quietly keeps everything running. Endless dirt roads stretch across the map, connecting resource nodes, factories, and facilities. And along these routes move the lifeblood of the war. These Logi players deliver crucial supplies of ammo, weapons, and more to the front and all across the map. It's not flashy work, but it's vital. Every bullet fired, every tank deployed, and every bunker repaired exists because someone made the long drive to deliver what was needed. These players that transport goods often go unnoticed, but without them, even the strongest army would fall apart. Today we're diving into transportation in Foxhole, what it looks like, why it's such a challenge for players to get into, and why it's one of the most important parts of every war. Moving supplies might not sound exciting, but without it, nothing else in the game works. At times, Foxhole can feel like Truck Simulator War Edition, where you spend hours hauling supplies across long stretches of road. It's a different pace from the frontline chaos. Right now, transportation in Foxhole can be divided into two main categories, land and sea. We might eventually see air transportation introduced with the upcoming airborne update, but that's still uncertain. On land, players rely on Logi trucks, flatbeds, and trains, while at sea, barges, freighters, and the bluefin handle the heavy lifting across the water. Gathering resources and producing supplies in the backline is a fairly straightforward process. There's just enough interaction and management to keep you engaged while you work, and even solo players can quickly build up a solid stockpile of materials for the front. However, the real challenge isn't making the supplies, it's getting them to where they need to go. That's where transportation becomes the true test of patience and coordination. In World War I and World War II, logistics played a massive role in determining victory. Armies that could constantly move fuel, food, and ammunition to the front were the ones that lasted longest. No matter how powerful the weapons or how skilled the soldiers, without steady supply lines, entire assaults would collapse, and this holds true to Foxhole as well. Transporting supplies isn't the most exciting part of the game. Filling up a truck or flatbed takes time, and the drive itself can be long and uneventful. On average, it takes about 5 to 10 minutes to cross a single region, and in one of my older videos, I drove a Logi truck across the entire map during resistance phase, and that trip took around 35 minutes. I would say the map isn't overly massive. Most supplies can reach their destination relatively quickly, but the challenge isn't in distance, it's how repetitive and tedious the process can feel. Everything in Foxhole, from the smallest rifle round to sometimes even tanks, depends on consistent and reliable transportation. Fuel keeps the war machines rolling, and shells keep the front lines firing. When those deliveries stop, entire regions can stall. It's a chain reaction that shows just how critical transportation is. Even the best built Logi networks are only as strong as the drivers who keep them moving. There are many ways to transport supplies to the front, and some take more time and coordination than others. Logi trucks are the bread and butter of Foxhole's transport system. They're simple, reliable, and absolutely essential. They're the first vehicle most players learn to use in Logi. They are capable of hauling almost everything. Their value comes from their versatility and the countless miles they cover keeping the war effort alive. These trucks can be used in the front line, midline, and backline, and can be used at any stage of the war. They're so cheap that some players will even use them to drop off supplies at the front and then leave them at the front only to spawn to the backline again to grab another truck and skip the boring part of driving it back empty to get more supplies. Next, we have flatbeds. They are the workhorses of medium-scale Logi, built for moving liquid containers, shells, and 4 times the amount of a Logi truck worth of supplies. Flatbeds are used more for backline and midline Logi. They take longer to load and move slower, which can make this a tough sell for when you need more supplies moved around the map. They might be slower and require more planning, but when used efficiently, they can make or break a region's supply line. And last, let's talk about trains. Locomotives are one of the most efficient ways to move massive amounts of supplies between major Logi hubs in Foxhole. Once the rail lines are built and connected, they can transport more goods in a single trip than a whole convoy of trucks. However, their efficiency comes at a cost. They require a lot more planning, infrastructure maintenance, and coordination to keep the rail network running smoothly. You normally only see medium to large size regiments using these to move supplies from the backline to the midline. As someone who has helped with loading a train full of containers and unloading it at a midline storage depot, I have found that this can take sometimes upwards to 30 to 45 minutes to complete, and that's not including taking the train back to the backline to either be loaded again or parked in a safe place. These 3 vehicles for transportation are the main ways for transporting on the mainland. When out at sea, players mainly use barges, freighters, and bluefins. Barges are essentially the Logi trucks of the sea, fittingly so since they often carry Logi trucks loaded with supplies, while open waters freighters means you're not confined to roads. These runs can still take 30 to 45 minutes, especially when delivering critical supplies to smaller islands. Freighters, on the other hand, are the heavy lifters of Navy Logi. They can carry up to 5 containers with 60 supply slots each, but their massive capacity comes at the cost of speed. Loading, maneuvering, and docking take a long time, and solo runs can easily stretch over an hour or more. Because of this, freighters are best operated by regiments or organized groups working together. The last major ship used for transporting supplies is the Bluefin. It's essentially a mobile storage depot. These massive vessels are typically managed by medium to large regiments, and normally deployed when a region is in dire need of supplies to sustain the front lines. These are all the common ways to transport supplies within Foxhole. There are many other unique ways to transport supplies, but they are less common. The number of players who take on the role of transporter in Foxhole is surprisingly small. Most players don't want to spend their limited playtime driving across the map or sailing across the sea just to deliver supplies. Outside of the frontline bunker deliveries, much of this essential work goes unnoticed by the wider player base, even though it's what keeps the entire war effort moving forward. When it comes to backline or midline logi, few players want to commit 30 minutes to an hour or more just to complete a delivery run, and honestly, that's understandable. It's not the most thrilling part of the game. Many transportation players I know often have a movie, TV show, or music playing in the background while they work. One Logi player had this to say about their experience with transportation in Foxhole: "I've spent entire evenings just hauling supplies back and forth, and honestly, it can get pretty dull after about an hour. But when you see the front holding because you kept them supplied, it makes every long quiet drive worth it." End quote. And another Logi player had this to say: "Yeah, it's boring, but someone's gotta do it. Everyone loves to fight on the front line, but none of them think about who's driving their ammo and fuel to the front lines. Without us, they'd be throwing rocks by day 3. End quote. The old saying, "Logi wins wars," is absolutely true. Without these players transporting supplies to the front, everyone else would be left fighting with pistols and fists. As a Logi player myself, I know many who genuinely enjoy the sense of purpose that comes with keeping the war effort alive and giving frontline troops the tools they need to fight, but I also know plenty who can't stand the monotony of transportation and wouldn't dream of spending their gaming session driving supplies for hours. I think it's also worth mentioning that running supplies can be dangerous work. Enemy players, known as partisans, occasionally slip behind the lines and destroy transport vehicles, wiping out both your time and effort in an instant. After spending so long loading up and making the trip, losing everything before your destination can be incredibly frustrating. For many players, that kind of setback is enough to make them swear off transportation entirely. This leads to an important question: how can Foxhole's transportation bottleneck be improved? Should the developers try to make transporting supplies more appealing to a wider audience, or is it meant to be tedious and demanding by design? Maybe the struggle itself is what makes Logi and Foxhole so rewarding for those dedicated few who keep the war machine running. There are a few quality of life improvements I'd love to see added to transportation in Foxhole. First, faster pull times from storage depots and seaports would make a huge difference. One of the most frustrating parts of delivering supplies is standing around waiting for your cargo to load. Sometimes it takes longer than the actual drive. A potential fix would be slightly reducing pull times for higher ranked players, or scaling them based on distance from the front lines, so deeper backline logic can operate more efficiently. Next, I'd like to see a dedicated logic queue for entering regions. No one wants to sit in a 15 to 30 minute queue just to deliver supplies, and this alone kills most players' motivation to help with transportation. My idea would be to have 5 to 10 Logi slots per region. Once a Logi player enters through this queue, they'd have 10 to 15 minutes to make their delivery before their slot opens for someone else and they're kicked out. It's not a perfect system, but with some balancing, I think it could drastically improve supply flow. Last, I'd love to see a stat tracker for total distance traveled in a vehicle during a war. It's a small change, but it would give transportation players something to strive for, a sense of accomplishment for the miles or kilometers they've covered keeping their faction supplied. Honestly, one other side idea I think the devs, or us players, should do is start a recruiting campaign aimed straight at truck simulator players. They already have the patience and appreciation for long hauls, and would make great transporters in Foxhole. The Logi side of this game is practically made for them. The planning, the long drives, the satisfaction of a perfect delivery. If we could bring even a small group of veteran truck sim gamers over to us, our supply lines would be constantly moving. These are just a few changes I would like to see help with the bottleneck of transportation. Maybe we will see new mechanics or additions through the new airborne update, which is coming out soon. Looking ahead, the introduction of air transport in Foxhole could completely change how Logi works. Imagine planes flying over the front lines, dropping supply crates into contested regions. It would make resupplying faster and more flexible, though it would likely come with a higher resource cost to balance its power. Airborne Logi could potentially reduce some of the bottlenecks that ground and sea transport support face. As Foxhole continues to evolve, it's exciting to think about how players will adapt and find new ways to keep their faction supplied from the sky. Transporting supplies in Foxhole can definitely be mind-numbing at times, but it's also one of the most rewarding and impactful roles in the entire game. Every successful delivery strengthens your faction's ability to fight, build, and hold the line. It's the quiet backbone of every victory, the kind of work that rarely gets recognition, but always makes a difference. So while it might not have the explosions or glory of the front lines, every war is ultimately won by the players who keep the wheels turning and the supplies moving. What are your thoughts about transportation in Foxhole? Do you love it or do you hate it? What kind of things would you like to see Airborne bring to Logi? Let me know in the comments. Thank you all so much for watching and for your support. Make sure to subscribe for more Foxhole content. I'll see you out on the battlefield. Cheers.